Nancy Pelosi actually participated in an Oxford Union debate. Now, she debated Winston Marshall. Winston Marshall is a former member of Mumford and Sons. Do you guys remember this band, like Mumford and Sons? They're kind of cool, you know, kind of chill. Well, what's interesting about this, we'll get into the debate in just a second, but what's interesting about this is one of the criticisms that is raised during this debate, besides populism, is the criticism of the elite, right? Of the wealthy people, and they talk about working class people as well. However, both of them, Nancy Pelosi and Winston Marshall, come from wealth. Like they're not, you know, they didn't grow up poor or working class. Like they had come from a pretty wealthy background. So it's interesting that once again you see people debating about what working class people want, but neither of them came from working class families. So that's interesting. Let's start with this statement here from Nancy Pelosi. Let's go ahead and dive with her first, and then we're going to get into Winston's message. So Yegor Petrov says, "This is great. Nancy Pelosi gets called out to her face by Winston Marshall during the Oxford Union debate. She interrupted him numerous times." Let's go ahead and start with Nancy's statement here.
The fact is that using whether it's people different from me, nationalism, populism, is a very dangerous threat to democracy, not just in America, where we're seeing it play out, but in the whole world. In the
Pause, and we'll come back a little bit. Do you guys consider nationalism and populism to be the same thing? Because I don't consider that to be the same thing. But it seems that Nancy Pelosi is actually, she's equating the two, like she believes that they're both the same thing. Let's go back in.
Where we're seeing it play out, but in the whole world, in the context of a fight between democracy and autocracy, not mine, but the version of populism, ethno-nationalist populism, which tries to bring down education and fake news, the media, which is a protector of democracy.
So here it sounds like she's basically talking about Donald Trump, you know, Donald Trump's 2016, you know, presidential term. It sounds like that's what she's talking about. And I think, you know, it just bringing down education into, it seems like to me, that's what she has in her head when she thinks of populism and why she considers populism to be a threat to democracy, because she equates that with Donald Trump's presidency, not thinking about the fact that there is a left populism. Like people would say that Bernie Sanders' former platforms was a form of populism, right? So she just can't separate the two. Like anything that seems to have happened under Donald Trump is a threat to democracy, according to Nancy Pelosi. So she's not actually thinking about or looking at what populism actually means. She just assigns it with Donald Trump. And because it's assigned to Donald Trump, she considers it to be a bad thing.
That version is contributing in countries other than our country and is a danger to democracy. We think democracy is on the ballot in America. It's a victory that we must win, because it will only make matters worse if they have another stay at what they're doing to the courts in our country, the fear that they're instilling in jurists in our country, the suppression of the vote in our country, the role of their big, dark, rich billionaire donors who don't want to pay taxes, suffocating the airways from the fossil fuel industry and the gun industry and the rest of that. So
pause for a second. So again, she doesn't realize there's different sides of populism. But also, it's interesting that she's bringing up the billionaires, because the way I kind of see is like, really, Nancy? I mean, aren't you a part of a party that has billionaire interests, right? Don't you guys entertain these billionaires like anytime you're looking for money for your campaigns? So it just, I felt like this was rambling, like it's just kind of all over the place. One minute she's talking about populism and a threat to democracy, and now she's talking about, the billionaires and things. Like, it just seems like she's just meshing like words together. It's really weird.
Money and populism, sadly, have gone together with this ethno-nationalist, what they call elite, which we call education, free press, and the rest. So I urge you to think in terms of the word. It says it's a threat. You're going to deny that it's a threat to democracy in the versions that have emerged in America so clearly? And why does everybody here say to me, what happens if he gets elected? Well, you can't let that happen, because for us,
See, this is the problem. She's talking about Donald Trump instead of talking about what populism actually means.
You're going to deny that it's a threat to democracy in the versions that have emerged in America so clearly? And why does everybody here say to me, what happens if he gets elected? Well, you can't let that happen, because for us, this election is Washington crossing the Delaware.
A few moments later.
You may be thinking now that Trump is a populist. You are right. He didn't accept the 2020 elections, and he should have. So should Hillary in 2016, so should Brussels, and so should Westminster in 2016, and so too should Congresswoman Pelosi, instead of saying the 2016 election was, quote, hijacked.
So that's a really good point that he brings up there. But the thing is, again, I think with this debate, one criticism that I do have is that I wish they would have just stuck to the terms, right? Populism and nationalism, and not make this about Donald Trump. Is this a debate about populism, or is this a debate just about Donald Trump, right? So Nancy's kind of all over the place. I want to get to some of the more, I guess, interesting moments of this debate, where Winston Marshall actually tweeted this himself. And he says, in her speech, Pelosi argues that voters are blocked from making good, rational decisions and voting Democrats, right, because of their culture and views on God. So we go on a little bit more here with Nancy, and then we'll chime in with Winston.
Of these poor souls who are looking for some answers. We've given them to them, but they're blocked by some of their views on guns. They have the 3 Gs, guns, gays, God, that would be a woman's right to choose. And the cultural issues cloud some of their reception of an argument that really is in their interest.
So again, she's basically talking about MAGA, right? She's basically talking about those individuals. Let's go ahead and bring this in. So here's the more like heated part of this debate.
Is democracy.
I now look to Mr. Winston Marshall to close the case for the opposition.
Ladies and gentlemen, words have a tendency to change meaning. When I was a boy, woman meant someone who didn't have a cock. Populism has become a word used synonymously with racist.
I think he could have avoided that first part. Like, I wouldn't have added that.
Heard ethno-nationalist, with bigot, with hillbilly, redneck, with deplorables. Elites use it to show their contempt for ordinary people. This is a recent change. Not long ago, Barack Obama, while still president at the North America's Leaders Summit in June 2016, he took umbrage with the notion that Trump be called a populist. How could Trump be called a populist? He doesn't care about working people. If anything, Obama argued he was the populist.
And as we saw, that definitely wasn't the case, right? Like, Barack Obama tried to argue that, he was running on, yes, we can, and that he was actually the populist. And obviously, when Barack Obama won presidency, he showed us that he was just like all the other presidents before him, that he supported corporate interests, right? So that's what he was there for. He ran on one thing, but once he was elected, we saw he was no different than the others. But I think what's really interesting is how they keep connecting this to Donald Trump, when you have to remember Bernie Sanders' campaign was also populist, right? This was also populist ideas. These are, policies that focus on working class people and uplifting those people instead of what's best for the elite or the oligarchs. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. The problem that you run into when someone like Barack Obama says that, Trump is saying he's populist or whatever, people can point to Donald Trump and say, well, he's a billionaire. He's a part of the elite that populism basically frowns upon, right? So it is not uncommon for some of these words or some of these movements or actions that are actually for working class people to be co-opted, whether it's co-opted by billionaires, the billionaire class, or the Democratic Party or the Republican Party. Like, this has happened throughout actually decades. It's happened over and over and over again. We saw it happen with BLM, right? So I'm going to show you after this debate what the actual definition of populism means, because that's important how they keep bringing this back to Trump.
If anything, Obama argued, Bernie was the populist. It was Bernie who'd spent 5 decades fighting for working people. But Trump, something curious happens. If you watch Obama's speeches after that point, more and more recently, he uses the word populist interchangeably with strongman, with authoritarian. The word changes meaning. It becomes a negative, a pejorative, a slur. To me, populism is not a dirty word. Since the 2008 crash, and specifically the $1 trillion Wall Street bailout, we are in the populist age.
Now, this is significant, and I think this was smart that he added this piece here about the 2008 bailout, because that happened under Democrat leadership. That was under Barack Obama's presidency, where he decided to bail out Wall Street instead of the American people. And people lost their homes. People were evicted. People kicked out on the streets, right? So I thought it was actually a good idea that he implemented that, just to say to Nancy Pelosi, like, listen, you're criticizing, this term populism, but where did the uprising of populism really start to come from after that 2008 housing crisis? So a lot of people look back during Barack Obama's presidency, and this is why you had some people that voted for Barack Obama twice and turned around and voted for Donald Trump. This is why, because the working class people were left behind. Over years after year after year, all of these different politicians promised that they're going to help out the little man. Notice how they went from helping out working class people to helping out the middle class. Notice how you don't hear them talk about poor people. So when Bernie Sanders ran and he said, listen, we got to help out working class people, etc., that was a form of populism. The media, the Democratic Party, the DNC, they were quick to shut it down. They said, no, this is gaining too much interest. We need to make sure that he never gets the Democrat nomination, because the reality is they don't want to help out the working class people. They're not in office to help out working class people. They are in office to protect corporate interests and to help out corporate interests, Wall Street, and the military industrial complex. That is what they are there for. So I thought that was good that he actually inserted that.
And for good reason. The elites have failed. Let me address some common fallacies, some of which have been made tonight. If the motion was that demagoguery was a threat to democracy, I would be on that side of the House. If the motion was that political violence was a threat to democracy, I'd be on that side of the House. January 6th has been mentioned. A dark day for America indeed. And I'm sure Congresswoman Pelosi will agree that the entire month of June 2020, when the federal courthouse in Portland, Oregon was under siege and under insurrection by radical progressives, those too were dark days for America. Yes?
There is no equivalence of it. So that, yes.
So you don't agree? That's fine. You don't agree. That's fine.
But it is not like what happened on January 6th.
So here we go. So one thing for those of us that have actually like participated in debates, I mean like real debates, those of us that were a part of the debate team, I was on the debate team when I was in high school, you're not allowed to interrupt someone when they're talking. So this format could be a little bit different at Oxford, but that shouldn't have happened. Nancy Pelosi should not be allowed to butt in, and she's supposed to wait till it's her turn and then she can express those views. That's why when you're debating against someone, you sit there and you take notes, which is what she should be doing. You take notes, and then when it's your turn to speak, you can make that statement, right? So really interesting.
So you don't agree? But you'll condemn those days. My point, though, is that all political movements are susceptible to violence and indeed insurrection. And if we were arguing that fascism was a threat to democracy, I'd be on that side of the house. Indeed, the current populist age is a movement against fascism. I've got quite a lot to get through. Populism, as you know, is the politics of the ordinary people against an elite. Populism is not a threat to democracy. Populism is democracy. And why else have universal suffrage if not to keep elites in check?
But that's the thing, okay? So here we go. That's the thing. People like Nancy Pelosi that have benefited from that system, that elite system, they don't want to keep elites in check. So any type of movement or any type of organization or word like populism that is actually supposed to benefit the working class people and also criticizing the elite, she's going to be against that. People like her, Hakeem Jeffries, don't get me wrong, like they may be good on some issues, but when it comes to actually fighting power, when you're fighting against the oligarchy, they're going to find a way to criticize that movement, just like they found a way to criticize the Bernie Sanders campaigns, right? So this is what people have to fully grasp here. Nancy Pelosi is always going to defend the establishment. That is why she has been in Congress for as long as she has. That's why she was Speaker of the House. You got to remember where she comes from. She comes from a political family. From what I understand, she's tapping her daughter on to come in and try to take her seat once she officially retires. So this is who she is. So instead of standing up for the working class people, she is here standing up for the elite. So this was a mask off moment for Nancy Pelosi and for anyone who still believes that she is out there doing the right thing for the people.
Ladies and gentlemen, given the success of Trump and more recently Javier Milei taking a chainsaw to the state behemoth of Argentina's bureaucratic monster, you'd be mistaken for thinking this was a right-wing populist age. But that would be ignoring Occupy Wall Street. That would be ignoring Jeremy Corbyn's for the many, not the few. That would be ignoring Bernie against the billionaires, RFK Jr. against Big Pharma, and more recently, George Galloway against his better judgment. Now, all of them, including Galloway, recognize genuine concerns of ordinary people being otherwise ignored by the establishment. I'm actually rather surprised that our esteemed opposition, Congressman Pelosi, is on that side of the motion. I thought the left was supposed to be anti-elite.
Pause. So this is one of the mistakes, right? Calling Nancy Pelosi the left. The Democratic Party is not left, but oftentimes people refer to them as left. Left is further left than it's past the Democratic Party. So that is left. So Nancy Pelosi is not left. So that's the first problem. The second problem is this statement that's coming up here. I thought the left were supposed to be anti-establishment. Again, as long as you are considering the Democratic Party to be left, you are constantly going to get this wrong. So I think he does a good job here, hitting back at Nancy Pelosi. They're saying that Nancy Pelosi actually won the debate, officially won the debate, but social media disagrees. Social media is siding with him. So I totally get that. But at the same time, it's important that we clear up these terms and what they actually mean. First and foremost, people have to stop calling the Democratic Party left. It is misleading. And it's actually very, it puts a stain on those of us who actually are left. It really does. I'm really tired of them being referred to as left because they're not. They're not. They support the establishment. They support the billionaire class. They support corporate interests. People who are left support the working class. They are against the establishment. They're against the oligarchy. The Democratic Party is not against those things. So this is one flaw I would point to in his argument.
Thought the left was supposed to be anti-establishment. Today, particularly in America, the globalist left have become the establishment. I suppose for Ms. Pelosi to have taken this side of the motion, she'd be arguing herself out of a job. But it's here in Britain where right and left populists united for the supreme act of democracy, Brexit. Polls have showed the number one reason people voted for Brexit was sovereignty, for more democracy. Thank you. What was the response of the Brussels elite? They did everything in their power to undermine the democratic will of the British people, and the Westminster elite were just as disgraceful. As we've heard, David Cameron called the voters fruitcakes, loonies, and closet racists. The Liberal Democrats did everything they could to overturn a democratic vote. Keir Starmer campaigned for a second referendum. Elites would have had us voting and voting and voting until we voted their way. Indeed, that's what happened in Ireland and in Denmark.
And that's what happens here in the United States under the US government. Right? So you think about it, when these politicians are voting on a piece of legislation, oftentimes they're voting in the interest of their donors. I mean, if you take money from Big Pharma, of course you're going to vote against a bill for Medicare for all if it comes across your desk. Of course you're going to vote against that. Right? If you support the military industrial complex, you're probably going to vote against that too, because that's a benefit that the military has, where TRICARE health insurance is actually really, really great. I'm not going to lie about that. So you have to detach the corporate interests from the politicians. So until corporate interest is detached from electoral politics, this is always going to be an interest. One hold that the oligarchy has is the electoral system. It's not just the amount of money that they have. They have a hold on electoral politics. So they actually have these puppets in office that do their bidding. We have to find a way to end that. We have to find a way to break that up. If you don't break that up, this is always going to be an issue.
Let's look at some of the other populist movements. The Hong Konger populist revolt is literally called the pro-democracy movement. The farmer revolts from Netherlands to Germany, France, Greece to Sri Lanka. Farmers are taking their tractors to the road to protest ESG policy that's floated down to us from those all-knowing, infallible elites of Davos. The trucker movement in Canada became anti-elitist when petty tyrant Prime Minister Justin Trudeau froze their bank accounts, not the behavior of a democratic head of state.
So again, that's referencing top down. And someone mentioned this in the chat. Teddy G said, it really isn't left versus right. It's up versus down. Yeah. So let's go back to the Canadian truckers. Was that a left right protest? Was that a left right movement? No, that was actually top versus down. So a lot of these things in reference to populism involve the top versus, or top down, the bottom versus the top. And that's what a lot of people don't want to admit. Nancy Pelosi doesn't want to acknowledge that, because then she would have to admit that she too is complicit that she too is a part of the problem, that she too really has voted against oftentimes the needs of the working class people. Where's the bill? Where's the vote for Medicare for all? Why isn't this brought to the floor? Right? Because again, corporate interest, big pharma. People don't want to vote for it because they're attached to big pharma. They get donations from them. That's what Nancy doesn't want to really address.
The Gilets jaunes in France, ULEZ in London, working people protesting policy that hurt them. And how are they treated? They're called conspiracy theorists. They're called far right by the mayor as well. Ladies and gentlemen, populism is the voice of the voiceless. The real threat to democracy is from the elites. Now, don't get me wrong. We need elites. If President Biden has shown us anything, we need someone to run the countries. When the president has severe dementia, it's not just America that crumbles, the whole world burns. But let's examine the elites.
So do you see what he just did here? Something I want to mention. Notice how he said he's starting to criticize the elites, but notice he said we still do need the elites. Ah, yes, Cindy just noticed it. Cindy said we need the elites. Yeah. So you see what's happening? So again, you have two people that come from wealthy backgrounds. You got Nancy Pelosi and you have Winston Marshall. They're both from privileged backgrounds. They're not from working class families. Instead of having two people who are part of the working class have this debate and this discussion. So notice how he even he tries to, in a way, protect the elite by saying we need the elites. His family, if I'm not mistaken, has real estate investment.
European corporations spend over 1 billion euros a year lobbying Brussels. US corporations spend over $2 billion a year lobbying in DC. 2/3 of Congress receive funding from pharmaceutical companies. Pfizer alone spent $11 million in 2021. They made over $10 billion in profit. No wonder then that 66% of Americans think the economy is rigged against them for the rich and the powerful. And by the way, we used to have a word for when big business and big government were in cahoots. And I think any students here of early 20th century Italian history know what I'm talking about. What about big tech? Throughout the pandemic, Biden's team, the FBI, and the Department of Homeland Security colluded with big tech in censoring dissenting voices, not kooky conspiracy theorists. People like Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, the Stanford epidemiologist. People like Harvard scientist Martin Kulldorff. People spreading true information, not misinformation, true information at odds with the government narrative.
Now, this is one of the strongest parts of his argument, I feel, because I don't think Nancy was prepared for this one. He brings up the issue of censorship, right? Silencing voices, which has happened under Biden's administration. You can't deny that, right? We saw that through the Twitter files. They're still trying to silence people now through TikTok. So there's that as well. So censorship, the elites, who controls the narrative? The media, mainstream media controls the narrative, but who is telling them what narrative to distribute? The elites. So Nancy Pelosi, she knows this. By the way, she's not stupid. She may sound a little drunk, but she's not stupid. And she knows. She knows that the State Department has their narrative, and that's the one that the mainstream media is going to follow. And most people that watch mainstream media are going to believe that narrative. That's how it goes. And they'll try to silence anyone that goes against it. So the censorship piece that he mentioned is important when someone like Nancy Pelosi brings up this issue of democracy.
Need I remind you? Democracy without free speech is not democracy.
Yep.
This is a direct breach, by the way, of the First Amendment. Before COVID, intelligence services colluded.
And then we'll stop it there because we're not going to get into the whole pandemic thing. You guys know how YouTube is about that. But I think, like, again, they said that Nancy Pelosi actually won the debate. But again, if you check the message, the responses that I've seen on social media, most people on social media are agreeing with him. So just FYI. But I do want to bring up this definition of populism to close out this story, because, again, I don't want people to be distracted. So let's go ahead and dive into this here. We'll pull it up. And again, this is from dictionary.com. Let's pull it up onto the screen. So it says here again, populism, a political approach that strives to appeal to ordinary people who feel that their concerns are disregarded by established elite groups. I'll say it again, a political approach to appeal to ordinary people who feel that their concerns are disregarded by established elite groups. And that is what Nancy Pelosi has a problem with. Mask off. Over and over again, mask off. Very telling, very telling. Again, for those of you just joining, that was actually Winston Marshall. He was a former member of Mumford and Sons, that band. So yeah, buddy. Very interesting times. Poor Nancy. Don't worry, though. She has an entire fridge of ice cream to make her happy when she gets home. Let's dive into some of the comments here. Simply C says she denounces nationalism because they want a unified world authoritarian government. Ooh, spicy, Simply C. William says this is why it's important to define terms up front in a debate. I agree with you, William. I agree 100%. The Oracle, the real threat to democracy is capitalism and the unwillingness of the elite who populate government to hear and respond to the needs of the people. Well said, the Oracle. Jelaine says a billionaire can be a populist, but it's rare. Yeah. Yeah.